Hello and welcome to this recording of an updated version of my research paper on Duncan Campbell's 2009 film Make It New John, which concerns the rise and fall of the DeLorean Motor Company factory that built the famed stainless steel gull-winged DMC-12 supercar in Dunmurry, an area in southwest Belfast, Northern Ireland. I first gave versions of this paper at Newcastle University and the University of Aberdeen in February 2015. It involves working class issues during the Northern Ireland conflict and acts of adaptation, appropriation and mediatised mythology in post-conflict moving image production. The conflict, colloquially referred to as the Troubles, erupted after months of upheaval when security forces clashed with civil rights protests beginning in August 1968. After the partition of Ireland in 1922, many Catholic nationalists in the newly formed UK region, consisting of 6 of the north-easternmost counties of Ireland, increasingly felt economically excluded and socially marginalised. Also emerging after and alongside student and workers' protests in Europe and the civil rights movement in the USA, organisations such as the People's Democracy and the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association were formed. These groups largely comprised of Irish nationalists and included some working-class Protestant Unionists who were also struggling with lack of employment and housing. Violence often erupted when the British government attempted to regain control over unsanctioned protests. The Troubles began as a civil conflict stemming from economic and class inequalities, and not quite the religious Protestant versus Catholic war it is often reduced to in national and global news media. This tension between forgotten realities and mediated perceptions of the past provides some historical context to my analysis of Campbell's Make It New John. The film presents a mixture of archive-based documentary and creative docudrama through which the facts, myths and mysteries surrounding the persona and brand of John DeLorean and his unusual role in Northern Irish and British politics are explored. Paul Ricoeur asserts that archives are collections of gathered documents selectively conserved at the behest of institutions. Much of the archival footage appropriated by Campbell in the making of this film comes from news and promotional materials belonging to organisations such as the BBC. Images associated with conventional mainstream television are reconstituted in a new order to be shown in art galleries and experimental film festivals. Although referring more to literary adaptation into film, Julie Sanders defines such appropriation as a process involving a removal away from the source material, in which select parts are de- and recontextualised. The result is a new cultural product involving the interplay between a range of texts within the new text. In mythologies, Roland Barthes asserts that myth is speech stolen and restored, only speech which is restored is no longer quite that which was stolen. When it was brought back, it was not put exactly in its place. Campbell's moving image works pull at the seams of patchwork truths, including the ones his films create. In doing so, they demonstrate that a given mediatised view of an event, or even a historical narrative playing out over years, is only one way of saying it. By displacing parts of a mediatised life and rebuilding the fragments with other bricolage collected along the way, the past can be reviewed, re-accessed and reinterpreted. Here, it's useful to consult Julie Christie's notion of intertextuality, where the text is a site in which the some parts intersect with one another, and it should be understood as a transformation of a range of other textual structures. These notions provide useful grounding when engaging with the ways Campbell's biographical films re-mythify already mediated personae by using the very media artefacts that produced the earlier myths about them in their immediate contexts. Make It New John shows how contemporary media myths and legend are legends are created and can be sustained in memory through their reworking. Campbell's appropriation of archival materials is part of an intricate network of resources he draws upon and reconstitutes to retell histories. His influences range from films by Dziga Vertov, Len Lai and Chris Marker to modernist writers like James Joyce and Samuel Beckett. I'll later touch on the Beckettian influences in Make It New John, as well as looking at the appropriated archival footage used to retell the story of the DeLorean factory in Dunmurry. Just like me, the DMC-12 of Back to the Future fame was built in Belfast. And here's me in one. This photograph was taken in 1988 in the Ulster Transport Museum, which is now situated with the Folk Museum in Catrall. The plant closed in 1982 and Back to the Future was released in 1985. This gives a sense of how quickly this flop of a high-profile supercar became an obsolete, archival, museumified object, and not one with status at the time, given how toddlers could play inside it in the 1980s. But today it gleams proudly on a barriered stainless steel plinth with informative displays and immortalising film posters, which you arrive at a while after a tantalising view of a full-size model design prototype from the earlier 1970s, and even more of a while after a must-see exhibition on another of Belfast's great transport successes, the Titanic, but that's a story for another day. Under its shiny stainless steel surface, for Northern Ireland the DMC-12 is a product of attempts by successive British governments to bring the conflict under control. The Dunmurry branch of the DeLorean Motor Company was initially subsidised by the Labour government in 1978 as an economic response to the civil conflict, which at this point was chaotic and unpredictable. There are, of course, colonial implications here, which, as Richard Kirkland points out, stem from the exchange of commerce intended to assist Ireland in catching up with modernity. Unemployment in the north was significant, and the paramilitaries played on the issues arising from this in their recruitment strategies. The region's post-industrial capital city had a globally renowned shipyard and factories and mills for a wide range of products and materials, including cigarettes, linen, flour and rope works. The working classes, most notably the younger men who would have entered their father's professions, suddenly had no work or prospects and faced the indignity and stigma of dole queues, as well as the emasculating effects of not being able to provide for young families or take pride that they were contributing to their communities. This in part led to many young people, often teenagers, becoming embroiled in the conflict. It certainly was a war between working class factions more than the perception of it being predominantly religious across all social classes. And at this point in the 1970s, the city was still largely integrated. Belfast is more segregated along sectarian lines today than it was 40 years ago. But class segregation was very much an issue, as denoted by this image on the slide. The text was common graffiti during the 1970s and 80s and was appropriated as the title of an earlier video installation by Campbell entitled Falls, Burns, Malone and Fiddles. And I'll use a map of the city to explain. The Falls Road is a working class area in West Belfast, a predominantly Catholic nationalist area. So for example, this is where the Sinn Féin president Gerry Adams is from. And the Malone area of South Belfast is largely populated with more middle and upper class folk. While many pockets in East, West, North and Central Belfast were experiencing riots, bombings and shootings on a regular basis, many in more middle-class areas, largely South Belfast, as is intimated briefly in the film Good Vibrations, could more easily ignore the violence or indeed catch up with it on television. Hence the phrase, while the Falls Road burns, the Malone Road fiddles, encompassing that tension between experiences of the conflict according to class. A familial conflict is implied at the beginning of Make It New John that leads to the film's adapted version of DeLorean to self-construct his surface image, persona and brand. As shown in the following sequence, the unconventional, fictionalized account of DeLorean's childhood in Detroit implies that the boy's father is abusive towards him and that he dabs on makeup to hide his difficult truth. The sequence also visualizes his aspirations in car design and shows his interest in working with mechanical commodity items. After his eureka moment amongst dazzling neon lights while running away, he is shown in his later teens, the mise-en-scène indicating interests in women and cars, both of which would become symbols of power, wealth and success in the real DeLorean's life. film then shifts to show an early adulthood steeped in 1940s, 50s, all-American Californian culture. That is, girls, music, beaches, surfing, and of course, more cars. This is followed by DeLorean's introduction to the car manufacturing industry, coinciding with economic crises and fuel shortages, to the summery tones of the Daytonas singing Little GTO. And the Pontiac GTO was designed by DeLorean when he worked for General Motors. The film moves on to the charismatic car manufacturer's incredible intersection with British politics. It shows DeLorean's prosperous beginnings in Belfast after the Labour government's lucrative offers to subsidise the plant enticed him away from siting it in other cheap production locations such as Portugal or the Republic of Ireland. Richard Kirkland posits that this attempt at providing jobs as an alternative to paramilitary recruitment demonstrated by the government's inherent misunderstanding of both the nature of the conflict and of DeLorean the businessman. By the time the Conservatives came to power in 1979, it emerged that the company was floundering with the livelihoods of 2,000 staff at stake. The substantial middle section of the film, depicting the complexities of these events, is fully archive-based. As the Dunmurry factory goes into receivership in 1982, the film segues into a fictionalisation of the workers' sit-in protest. The following clip demonstrates the transition from archival footage to the contemporary dramatisation shot on 16mm film.
We want your active support because we can win this fight and we can put you, Claire, Adam Butler and anybody else to get to the way in the place where it should be.
Rubber here, Peter. Rubber.
What about you, John?
Are you?
John. It's on, Sergeant.
1, 2, okay. Can you tell me?
Is this?
Yes, what do you think about John DeLorean now, after all that's happened?
Well, I think we all think we should be given more time to, more money to keep this going, get things right. I agree. There was one of the officers from Michelin said to me, how accurate he is or not, I don't know, but he said to me that the Michelin factory were offered 30 million from the government, which makes it completely ludicrous with regard to the DeLorean. If they were prepared to give 2,400 workers 30 million pounds to stay open, and they shut up, put us in receivership for 5 million.
The factory's problems were also overshadowed in reportage due to the almost constant presence of news crews which treated DeLorean with celebrity status when he was in town. The factory site became the backdrop of numerous protests in the early 1980s concerning the internment without trial of politically motivated prisoners and the Republican hunger strikes. Additionally, the DMC's closure in 1982 was secondary even in local news coverage to the Falklands War and Pope John Paul II's summer visit to Britain. The closing theatrical performance in the film reframes the dominant narrative by giving it back to the workers. They become centralised in DeLorean's absence. The film's title, Make It New John, channels Ezra Pound's modernist clarion call to make it new by making the old anew. The film presents a new telling of history told through that history's documents, as well as the collection of footage amounting to a film which defies straightforward classification. The DMC-12 is essentially a bricolage, that is, Levi Strauss's understanding of a collection as a group of disparate elements placed together which fail to connect as a coherent whole. The car's design combined aspects of various extant luxury cars. For example, its chassis came from the Lotus's Spirit, and the gull-wing doors were inspired by those of the classic Mercedes-Benz 300 SL. DeLorean, the man, brand and product, were amalgamations of different elements picked up along the way. Like the car he created, DeLorean was himself a reconstruction. Using enhanced parts, as a young man he had had plastic surgery which enhanced his jawline. He took his knowledge gained through years employed as a designer with General Motors to create the DeLorean Motor Company, which was funded by investment bankers. As shown in the earlier clip from the opening minutes, the film demonstrates such constructions using archival images presented in sequences involving reflexive devices like obvious cuts, stop motion, layering and disjunctive sound, which also draw attention to the film's own construction from disparate elements. By the end, the film explores the extreme contrast between the branded, charismatic persona and image of DeLorean and his anonymous working-class workforce. DeLorean's charm wears off as the company's financial failings escalate and the Tory government retracts all subsidies. DeLorean becomes increasingly vulnerable and isolated. His performances to camera and journalists are less suave and more restrained as time moves on. At the final decision announced by Tory MP James Pryor that the government's arm's reach support is ending, DeLorean disappears from the film altogether. In his absence, he lingers as a topic for discussion and protest. As shown in the clip featuring the workers, the archival footage of their sit-in protest over the loss of their much-loved and needed jobs builds towards a dramatised interview between an unseen journalist and 5 of the men. The theatrical sequence plays out in a series of long takes, with the camera roving among and zooming in to and out from the participants. The debates they have reflect the range of responses of the workers at the time, ranging from feeling sorry for DeLorean and blaming Thatcher. Notably, it's worth considering this factory closure and the treatment of its workers as a possible precursor to the miners' strikes in Britain 2 years later. And blaming DeLorean and believing reports of his alleged drug smuggling activities, thought, if true, to have been an attempt to save the failing company. The dialogue and its delivery are realist at first. The impression of verisimilitude is helped by the 16mm film that matches the grain and colour tone of the archival footage, yet the scene's staging and dialogue become Beckettian. The influence of Waiting for Godot is apparent with the men waiting hopelessly for a mythical figure who may never return as their arguments spiral around repetitively. They also disappear one by one, leaving only the quiet and passive John, played by Ian McElhinney, with the camera and voice of the off-screen journalist encroaching closer and closer on his psyche. This establishes an abstract site of exploration for the elusive yet larger-than-life DeLorean through the internal torment of worker John, who is pressed by the journalist for his thoughts. His behaviour appears passive, while his sparse answers to persistent questioning indicate that he is a lonely, isolated figure, largely due to mistakes he has made in younger days. In his older age, he has retracted into himself and become a trace of a person. A life opposite to, and yet which mirrors DeLorean's, who became the absent presence of a myth. Their lives became internal in response to the failures of their external lives. This too reflects the writing of Beckett's later life. There are uncanny resemblances between the Johns in Make It New John and the closed space of the solitary character in Beckett's novella Company, published in 1980. This person lies on his back in a dark room while a voice tells him about the past, present, and occasionally the future. The ending of Company is similar to the final moments of Make It New John, which ends on a fixed close-up of John, who wants to wait for the others to return. The journalist asks him what he's waiting for, and he says, "I'll hang on," and the film cuts off abruptly with a brief flash of 16mm leader before entering blackness. The closing passage of Beckett's Company reads, "But with face upturned, for good labour in vain at your fable, till finally you hear how words are coming to an end, with every inane word a little nearer to the last, and how the fable too, the fable of one with you in the dark, the fable of one fabling of one with you in the dark, and how better in the end labour lost and silence, and you as you always were, alone." The DeLorean story is essentially a story of failure. The car suffered from severe design flaws, frequent recalls, poor sales, and mistakes made by operatives who, although well-intentioned, the training they received was inadequate, and they were never kept in the same part of the production line for long enough to improve their skills. Even still, the car became immortalised in popular film culture, a medium based on a form consisting of the assemblage of disparate parts as one, and which archives the ghostly, replayable, absent presences of the past events and people which passed before the cameras. The British government's DeLorean project failed due to its misguided faith in DeLorean, its misunderstandings of the nature of the conflict, and what appears from the business's archives to be Thatcher's heavy-handed approach to disgracing and eradicating DeLorean and his business. Whatever the truth, many of the workers, although often excluded from this narrative or simply reduced to statistics in it, remain proud of their involvement with the legends of the man, factory and car, as some explained to me at a screening with the artist when the film was shown in the Belfast Exposed Gallery in 2011. After an illustrious, high-flying career in motor design and manufacturing, DeLorean was arrested on the 19th of October 1982 for alleged drug dealing, but he was acquitted when the case was found to be an FBI sting operation. He was still wanted on fraud charges in the UK when he died in 2005. Because of his career, charisma and that car, he too is immortalised as a cult figure. Finally, the reanimated archives as refreshed socio-political memory denote the failure of official forgetting. Their use presents a resistance to the suppression of memories of difficult, contested pasts, particularly those which are marginalised by dominant narratives. Instead, the film represents an urgency to reassess the past, encouraging the viewer to see events in different ways. When Make It New John is screened as a video installation, its repeated hourly play for the duration of its exhibition further extends this invitation to review, rethink, and remember. In summary, the DeLorean persona, or notion of his persona, in Make It New John embodies a site where the oppositions of past and present, history and fiction, and the public and private all slip across and through one another. His spectral presence continues to drift in and out of cultural memory from many different perspectives across the Western world. In oscillating between presence and absence in cultural memory, the John DeLorean persona becomes notional. His legacy is another ghostly trace of plural pasts that struggle to be remembered while at the same time are stored away in archives. DeLorean's marginal and perhaps unwitting role in attempts to fix the Northern Ireland conflict is an incredible story that struggles to be retained in regional, national and international cultural, political and economic memory. When the man, factory and car are remembered, usually at fashionable times such as the anniversary of the car's release, and much more frequently at the big anniversaries of the release of Back to the Future, those memories are selective and mediated, revolving around the DMC-12's distinctive relationship with Hollywood film culture. Like so much of Northern Ireland's contemporary visual culture, DeLorean is there, but not really there. Campbell's film represents a refusal to forget, a refusal for communities other than the Big Two and their stories to be marginalised or excluded from official histories. In this case, it's a willing workforce from mixed backgrounds otherwise deprived of jobs. The film's intertextuality mirrors the intersectionality of the politics, cultures, class structures, economics, and the internal and external contexts, the bricolage of disparate elements that amount to history-telling and storytelling. And as demonstrated in several ways in Back to the Future, as a franchise, the ability to go forward effectively is often facilitated by first going back. If you find this presentation of interest, you can find more on the topic on my blog at pblair.blogspot.co.uk and in my book Old Borders, New Technologies, Reframing Film and Visual Culture in Contemporary Northern Ireland. If you would like to support my freelance scholarship, you can donate via paypal.me/pblair. Any amount at all is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for accessing this video today.